So it wasn't entirely all that long ago. The cars that required things like this, they were generally meant, there's no nice way to put this, for tree huggers. But what's lesser known, those early vehicular pioneer tree huggers, better known as rich people, they were the only ones that could afford to take a flyer on bleeding edge technology. But now that's all changed because those rich tree huggers, they have more than two choices of ugly econobox. In fact, there's a totally new evil plan. Not to sell any cars to those rich tree huggers, rather just sell cars that require plugs to regular old rich people. Admittedly, the evil plan part, that's somewhat confusing, but the rich people part shouldn't be confusing at all because this, a Range Rover, but what Range Rover is it? That's where we bring all of this together. That is a Range Rover Sport, but not like the first edition we've already driven that had the V8 with super amounts of power, and not like the inline 6-mild hybrid that's on offer in the basic car. You see this, it's like Goldilocks. This is a plug-in hybrid. It's very similar to the GLE 450 that we drove in that it has a battery for a full electric driving range, but where it differs from the GLE 450, this not paired with a 4-cylinder engine. Rather, it's paired with that inline 3-liter 6-cylinder mild hybrid engine. But more interesting, this, like the GLE 450, it has a realistic range. It's not like a Volt back in the day for those tree hugger rich people. It was like 20 to 30 miles of range. This is a full 51 miles of usable range according to the US government, and from my early tests with the car spending a week with it. Now, interesting side note, the charging architecture, that's a bit slower than the GLE 450. On DC, it supports up to 50 kilowatts. On AC, only up to 7. That is very much back in the days of those rich tree huggers. Now, before you and I jump behind the wheel, a favor. If you get value out of these episodes, please share them, click like, and subscribe. Vielen Dank. Something tells me the following will not come as a shock to you. 5,860 pounds, or depending express your weights and measures, 2,658 kilograms with that dynamic mode. Oh, that actually takes off pretty well. This is downright quick. The 8-cylinder, it's more explosive the way it delivers power. This, it's linear. Yeah, you're getting some electrification here, which probably brings that about. But something has been done in the tuning of this 6-cylinder because, if I'm honest, in the Defender and other applications we've used it, it's kind of a rough engine. It feels and sounds like a diesel, which is a good thing in terms of the way it delivers power, but it's not supple. Here with the electrification and obviously some tuning, I don't know exactly what they did here. Put aside everything I have just told you about the way this thing drives. When you sandwich together the driving dynamics of the existing Range Rover Sport with this propulsion system, the way it delivers power, this is a totally relaxed experience. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game on the Absence Game with today's contestant, something that is very confused. No, not the car or the propulsion system, rather the pricing from year to year. See, this is a 2023 Range Rover Sport P440e, which is the plug-in hybrid. It only comes on offer as an autobiography. That, to me, is very confusing. You cannot get this propulsion system, at least in the US, in the basic $83,000 car. You have to pay $104,200 for the autobiography, which is the fancier model. Then we press on to the color here. They call this Varisian Blue, $710. It's a beautiful color, but like I told you in the episode where I premiered my personal car that has a similar color, this is terrible with a dark color interior. That's why you need the contrast, the cognac like I have in my car. This has this black and dark blue and gray, and on top of that you have to pay an additional $1,800 for it to not get leather. So that's one of these like vegan synthetic interiors. The tactile feel is good, but you have to pay extra for it. Then the cold weather package, $610 for a heated steering wheel, heated washer jets, and a heated windscreen. Now, we did already discuss that this propulsion system is only on offer in the fancier autobiography, which means more bits are fitted as standard. For example, the larger 22-inch wheels. However, if you want to make the spare tire 22 inches as well, that's an additional $500. Then does one want Wi-Fi in their $118,000 car? That's an additional $360. Then we have to pay an additional $300 to have the roof matching the body color. Now, most of these people like the two-tone thing where they put the black roof or a different color roof, which looks very cool, and I have to say makes these things stand out. But to charge extra for the same color, which is easier to paint, that doesn't make any sense. Then the only other thing we have to pay extra for is the destination handling from the UK. So these are actually built in their home country, not Slovakia, like the Defenders, $1,475, which brings us to a total retail price in 2023 of $109,585. So before you and I get too far down the road on how this thing drives, a huge advice. Remember the V8 Range Rover Sport of this generation we drove? That was unusually good because it has the active roll stabilization, the 48-volt system that was handed down by the Range Rover, which was handed down by other pioneers in that technology. This car, it is not on offer. One can't spec it. You can't custom build it with that system. And that's a shame because it transformed a very tall and very heavy vehicle. Really, the V8's about the same weight as this thing. And it made it nimble, it made it usable. I would argue it made it more fun to drive around town, light on its feet, I'd go so far as saying. You can kind of see that as we get more aggressive going through some of these turns. There's more lean, there's more tire squeal. And is that a problem in a vehicle like this? Most are going to be used to cart the rugrats around in fancy neighborhoods. But I do know a number of people that own these things, specifically the sports, that have sports cars in their collection, have something more fun, and they pick this because it can be driven a bit more aggressive, a little huge hinweis there. This generation of Range Rover and Range Rover Sport, I've gone on record as saying I don't think you need both anymore because the short wheelbase Range Rover with the active roll stabilization and the air ride kind of takes the place of what the Range Rover Sport, at least the way it drove. The two are very similar, and I would argue the Range Rover is a better looking vehicle, but you know, that's just one man's opinion. Now technically this is a first drive review, but we still have to cover two items that would be more at home in one of our Living With episodes. The first would be the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that's the fuel economy. The US government calls this for 21 combined. That's in hybrid mode. But screaming around the canyons like we're doing today, that should have an impact, but believe it or not, less of an impact than one would think. We're doing 19.7 average MPG, even with the driving up here today, as well as the Transit. But the 21, what I've learned, that's kind of like sandbagging the people who are going to buy one of these things, because what I've done driving it around town like a normal human being, but still driving like an aggressive New Yorker in and out of traffic, I'm doing 26 MPG in something this size. Now that's great real-world experience in the short time we've had this thing, but to really understand the aspects that make this different from other Range Rovers, like the range, is it the 51 like the government says, or are we going to get more or less? And that propulsion system, how is it to drive on a daily basis, going out for errands or taking the rugrats to school? That's what we're going to have to do a real Living With episode in a couple of months. And now let's go back to that non-leather interior to discuss three aspects. Number one, I am personally offended I have to pay an extra $1,800 to not get leather. Number two, color is a huge thing here. Remember that first edition we drove? It was kind of a burgundy red with a white and black interior two-tone. That looked magnificent, and the tactile feel absolutely backed it up. This, in like the dark blue with the gray and the black, this is an example of you eat with your eyes, and this is a meal I would not want to eat. And then third, something I've learned between the two vehicles, this type of material, the tactile feels great, but it scuffs so much easier than leather. So let's say for the sake of discussion, someone puts their arm here without a sleeve, there'll be a scuff from their skin. Or if you put something on the seat, like I put my Pelican case here, it's much easier to scuff here than in leather. Now granted, you can clean it, but keeping up with this on a daily basis, much harder than any leather interior I've ever experienced. As per usual, when testing vehicles like this, I have sandbagged you. I have held the EV charge for the end of the episode, so let's go ahead and switch on the electric motor and switch off the internal combustion engine. So now we're driving on sunshine. The first thing you notice is it's just as supple as it was with the two propulsion systems. Yeah, it's a little bit smoother, it's a little bit quieter, but it hasn't changed the personality of the way this vehicle drives. So put another way, it doesn't have like that numb feeling like a Mercedes EQ. It's closer to the way a Range Rover should drive, and that is definitely a good thing. Now, something that disturbs me about this system and many others that come to the US, and I believe this is a US EPA thing, not so much the manufacturer tuning. There are 3 modes here when it comes to hybrid. There's the save, which means I don't want to spend any of the energy from the battery like I did driving from the hangar up to here because I wanted to use the EV mode on camera. Then there's a hybrid mode, which gives you kind of the best of both worlds. Then there's this EV mode. Now let's try this EV mode foot to the floor. Oh, and it doesn't switch on the gas engine. That is fantastic. Okay, so huge thank you to whoever tuned that without a detent and were able to accelerate quickly in EV mode. That's something all the others should be doing, as opposed to forcing a switch to the gas engine in order to save a couple of electrons. But I'm getting away from the real point here. There isn't a mode that charges the battery on the go. This used to be a thing with plug-in hybrids back in the day when we first started seeing them from the likes of Mercedes and Porsche. You would put the car in sport mode and it would charge, yeah, only 20 miles, but it would charge in a matter of minutes. Now, from what I'm seeing and understanding from some of the engineers at different car companies, the systems that are sent to the US, they tune them differently than in Europe. They tune for EPA efficiency, so drive the numbers, meaning the fuel economy numbers. And to do that, at least according to some of the engineers I've spoken to, they have to change that charging mode. So it only holds the battery, doesn't charge the battery. To me, that's foolish, because think about the use case. I'm driving this thing not around town. I want to go from, say, Los Angeles to San Francisco. That's 400 miles. You only have 50 miles of range. I'd love to be able to drive the middle 50 miles on the freeway on EV when it takes the least amount of electrons to do that. But then when I'm back in the gas mode, why can't I replenish that 50 miles, say, in like an hour, and then get a bonus 50 miles? So instead of I'm spending 400 miles of gas, I'm only spending 300, or you kind of rinse and repeat. You see where I'm going here? This is not just a Range Rover thing. This is Range Rover, Mercedes, Porsche. They've all made the change. And my guess is they should probably come together and say, look, people who are buying these things, they're not thinking about like the very last minutia of fuel economy. There's no difference between 18 and 19. So if I can get an extra 50 miles on a road trip, let's do that instead of playing games with the US EPA. If you could sort that out, we'd really appreciate it. So what have you and I learned today? This, way better than expected. I would go so far as to saying this should be the base powertrain in all Range Rovers, even make it available in the Defender. It lives up to what Range Rover is trying to accomplish. But much more important, this, like the GLE 450e or other plug-in hybrids that now have 50 or more miles of range, and we'll see more coming down the road, these are great case studies to go back to the EU as well as Washington and say, look, there is still life left in internal combustion engines. These address the concerns you have. Anything beyond that, pushing down mandates that are very near in the future, which are totally unrealistic, that is fear-mongering. So I would suggest Mercedes, Land Rover, BMW, take a trip to Brussels, take a trip to Washington, show them this, and show them real-world use cases. But enough of me pontificating where culture meets politics. Rather, let's switch to the wish list. And here you know what I'm going to say. This should not be limited to the unusually expensive autobiography. Actually, the autobiography I think is too expensive. This should be the basic powertrain in the $83,000 car, as well as the basic Range Rover. But I am one man, and this is the point of the episode. I turn around to you guys to opine in the comments below, or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, if you found this episode of value, I would highly suggest you watch our GLE 450e plug-in hybrid if you haven't already. Very similar mousetrap, but they go about the execution a bit differently. You can see that here. Until I see you in the next episode, bis später.